And if you ask people to name, kind of prominent Augustinians, then I suppose for those religiously inclined, Martin Luther would pop up, perhaps at the Reformation, a prominent member of the order. If you were more scientific, perhaps Gregor Mendel might come to mind, because he began the research into the laws of genetics. It was latterly shown that he adjusted the statistics to fit the theory. Anyway, but now, of course, with Bob Prevost as Bishop of Rome, we have a third character to name as somebody kind of prominent in our order. And there's been a kind of interest. I don't know if you follow the tablet. They had a series, I think not yet complete, on what is Augustinian spirituality, which is well worth having a look at. There are different dimensions to it, as you can imagine. I thought one of the best was by Werner Genro. It was really good because he more or less put out what Bernadette hinted at. Will Leo be following Augustine, the theologian and controversialist, which could be quite severe, or Augustine, the pastor and spiritual guide, which is very accessible and appealing to us today? So which one will he fall for? Werner Genro hoped the second one. I guess we all do. The most accessible way to access the spirituality of St. Augustine is to read his biography, the Confessions. We probably all dipped into it to some degree, but it's an amazing product, the Confessions of St. Augustine. Perhaps a little difficult at the very beginning, but once the story starts about his own journey, then it really is fascinating, because he has produced what seems to have been the first really psychological autobiography, because he really looks at himself and questions his motives and his choices as he went through the various stages of his life. So it's kind of super interesting. And he begins, of course, with a very long section of prayer, as you would expect, having the most quoted line from St. Augustine: "You've made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they come to rest in you." And that's his starting point. At the end of the Confessions, he relocates himself in the story of creation, no less, because he has big reflection on the first chapters of Genesis at the end of the Confessions. And you might think that's an appendix, but not for him. It's part of his own story that he fits in with God's story in creation. So it's quite an invitation to reflect. If somebody asked me what were the marks then of Augustinian spirituality, I would pick out 4. The first one needs a Latin term, the cor inquietum. That's to say, that the restless heart. And that comes out very strongly in St. Augustine's own story. Initially, as he says himself very frankly, he got caught up in the beautiful things God had made and forgot the Creator behind them. Fine. Who doesn't do that? We all do that. It's a kind of invitation, a very strong one because of the integrity of the writing, not to put up with less. And of course, the temptation is to put up with less. In our own time, the distraction of materialism, the distraction of busyness, to let that be what life is. And Augustine would be very much against that, to be sure to trigger restlessness of heart. Also at a spiritual level, not to be content with where you are. As he says himself regularly, keep on walking. So there's a whole energy in there, which I think is very attractive to us today. The second bit I would put in there is, which also comes out in his story, is friendship and community were very important to him. And even kind of before his encounter with Christianity, he had created a sort of community of friends. And afterwards, when he was made bishop, he gathered a community around him so that he wasn't alone. And as Bernadette said, Leo was doing something similar, perhaps, in the Vatican. But I guess it must be quite strange to live in Baroque splendor. Anyway, can't imagine what that would be like.
Get used to it.
Get used to it, maybe. But it's but that sense of connectedness, friendship, that we know each other's stories, that we make the journey together, as we do here. Those are sort of key features of Augustinian spirituality. And as always, the kind of belonging in a group like this, a small, intimate group where we do know each other, kind of mediates as a kind of bridge to the bigger belonging to the whole Catholic project. And Augustine was very much, I suppose this lowercase c, very much a kind of a Catholic, because he tried different forms of Christianity, as you know. And finally he found himself in Catholic Christianity, really on the basis that it couldn't be for a few, it has to be for everyone, because the previous forms of Christianity he tried were elitist, especially the Manichaean version. Only a few will be saved, it's for the few, for the enlightened, for the elite. And he said, no, whatever form of Christianity is the right one, it has to be for everyone without distinction. Really good insight. The third dimension is, if I can use a term, is evangelism. But I'm not using it to mean, first of all, preaching to others. Evangelism is, first of all, letting the gospel be effective in our own lives, our own path of conversion, service, justice. And when we have made that conversion to try to live the gospel, then it becomes possible for us to begin to tell other people about the good news. But it has to be on the basis of that personal journey, that personal conviction, that personal experience. Otherwise, it's kind of third party. And in our order, and certainly in the Irish province, we had a very strong missionary tradition. When I joined the order, believe it or not, we were 250 people, most of whom were in Nigeria. On the missions, creating actually 2 dioceses and a seminary, and the whole project was very, very successful. But also we had people in Australia, and then later on in Ecuador. And I think it's quite significant that Leo himself was also a very practical missionary. I know the photographs have gone around of him in Wellington boots in a flood, or sitting on a mule, and so on. But hands-on, practical missionary. That's a bank of experience that nothing can replace. And in our time, that means for us our path of personal conversion, our concern for justice, our concern for migrants, and of course our concern nowadays for creation. So that evangelism is a very broad term that includes all these different pathways and journeys. And the last bit is perhaps a bit that's not so popular nowadays, which is, if I can put it like this, the intellectual journey. That's to say, to come up with an understanding of who you are, who God is, what God's project is in Jesus, and to have an understanding of it and make it your own. And Augustine was, of course, in his day, a high practicing intellectual writer, teacher, controversialist. But the task of integrating our understanding of the real world in which we live and our journey of faith belongs actually to everyone. Because everyone has the task of integrating ourselves individually, psychologically, spiritually, and also our understanding of the faith and the world in which we live. And it's the task, I guess, especially of religious leaders, to name the times in which we find ourselves living, and to find words for these times which carry the gospel or the good news into our time and culture. But of course, it can't be confined to experts or leaders. It's a job really of everybody. Of course, there are specializations. My specialization is scripture. John's specialization was psychology, actually, as you know. But the task can't be confined, say, to experts. Everybody has that job of integrating the faith and life, not only in practice, but also really to have an understanding, a proper and grown-up understanding of where we are in the faith and who we are. And those kind of 4 dimensions, like I could summarize them a little bit like this. It's the personal journey of faith, which is the task of everybody that wakes up. It's the invitation to belong, that we don't make this journey alone, not only in the present moment, but we make it in the company of previous generations, learning from their wisdom and experience. It's the journey of evangelism, a very broad term, meaning living what we have come to believe and putting it into practice nowadays with the various challenges in front of us. And finally, the task of integrating all these things practically, spiritually, and also intellectually as part of who we are as a whole human being.